as a job, because it's gonna be a job. PhD is a job. It's not a passion project. It's not something where, you know, I'm sustaining myself with my passion. Like, it's a job, like any other job. Ciao VISIEM, hi all. So today I'm going to be talking about the pros and cons of getting a PhD, or what I like and dislike about getting a PhD. I could talk about academia and my problems or my hatred for academia for hours on hours and hours. So I just want y'all to know that even though this video is probably going to be like a half hour, maybe even a little bit more, I will have covered about 2.3% of what I actually have to say. So keep that in mind. This is an incredibly condensed short list of pros and cons, and remember that this is a short video. I cannot give each bullet point the nuance it deserves. So if you have specific questions or issues or with things that I'm saying, or maybe, you know, this isn't my experience, Lulu, da-da-da, it's fine. First of all, this is my experience, but second of all, I can only say so much about each of the points within like 30-45 seconds for each bullet point. So just comment below, and I'm really happy to answer the comments or to talk about. I could talk about academia forever. So literally just comment below, and I'll gladly, like, any questions about academia in general you have. I'm so happy to be an open book about this, because I think so many of us people in academia gatekeep ourselves, and we don't tell a lot of truth, either to maintain our own position or for whatever other reasons, but we're not very honest about these things. So I'm gonna be honest, because I'm always honest. So let's go. So I'm gonna start with pros, and just so y'all know ahead of time, I think I have like 7 pros or 6 or 7 pros, and I have like 11 or 12 cons. It's not balanced, but I want you to understand that each pro is a huge. So pro number 1, you get to read for a living. I mean, any of us who are interested in learning, in reading, in educating ourselves, especially about like specific topics that you get to, like I'm pursuing a PhD in American politics, in, you know, race and class and gender and all of these different inequalities and things that interest me. So literally it is your job to read. I mean, that's amazing. And this is a point that I keep coming back to, because even though I do think that most of the things we learn in a PhD, I could have easily done on my own, you know, if I was reading the same books, but, you know, was working a regular ass office job, I probably could have learned all the same things. But that's the difference, you know, when you hold a full-time job, your days are taken, your hours are taken, so you have to try to squeeze a book here and there in between. Whereas for a PhD, you can never feel guilty about reading, because it is literally your job. My full-time job is to be sitting here with a book and reading and writing and so on, but like, what other profession, what other space and place is gonna give you that? Pro number 2 is you get to work from home, okay? If you watch my quarantine and chill video, you know I'm a homebody. I love being home. I think there are a few things I hate more than sitting in an office. Like when I used to work in DC, sitting in an office in office clothes and the office environment and all of that, I just felt myself shrinking and getting smaller and more miserable by the hour every single day. Working from home is a huge privilege. It's amazing and I love it so much. Apart from, of course, like going to class or teaching a class and so on, you can do that shit from home, and that's awesome. To me, that's a massive bonus, massive privilege, even though actually most people in my cohort don't choose to work from home. So you can still go to the library and do all your work, but you can work from home if you want to. Massive pro. Pro number 3, your time is yours, okay? So that means basically you set your schedule. If you want to wake up at noon or at 2 p.m. and have a leisurely breakfast / lunch / dinner at 4, and then, you know, stay up until 5 a.m. writing because that's when you're most productive, or however you want to set your day, you can do it. To me, I actually keep a very 9 to 5, 9 to 6 schedule because I live with my fiance and because I want to spend time with him, so I adjust to his time. But a lot of other people I know that are getting PhDs are not doing that at all. They're sleeping in, they're waking up whenever. You know, you choose to work. If you don't want to work this Monday, you don't have to. You can work on a Saturday or on a Sunday and so on. Like, your time being yours is something that, once again, only after holding like an office job in DC do I appreciate this so much. Like, being in charge of my own time, setting my own hours, it's powerful, empowering, it's absolutely amazing. And also with that, huge chunks of, I can't say free time because there is no free time, but like, you know, Christmas or winter break and summer break are amazing travel opportunities. Like, once you have a full-time job in the US particularly, you will never have more than like 2 weeks of vacation when you get to go somewhere. For me, like this semester, if it wasn't for the pandemic, I'd be out and about on many different continents, because if I'm able to work while I'm living in Thailand or Costa Rica, if I'm able to work, you know, at home in Latvia or whatever, unless I'm teaching this semester or taking a class, I can be out. Or during summer breaks and, you know, Thanksgiving breaks or whatever, you can be out and traveling. That's something that, once again, that is not a privilege that you will have in the US on a regular job. Pro number 4, the financials. This is gonna sound weird that I'm talking about the biggest con of the PhD, which is definitely gonna be in the cons list too, in here. But I think we have to talk about it because we have to keep in mind that people come from very different socioeconomic backgrounds, from very different, you know, income levels and so on. So for example, for me, prior to this PhD, after I graduated from university, when I got my bachelor's degree, I was an immigrant, fresh out of college, zero connections or like anything of the sort. I couldn't get a job anywhere, okay? My bachelor's in political science gave me nothing. Almost, I want to say like 60-80% of the job listings that my university had given us or that I could find out online would specifically say for US citizens and green card holders only. And even a lot of those jobs, even if they wouldn't say it, once you go through those interview processes, all of a sudden when they get your paperwork, they're like, we'll call you back, and you know. So basically I was working for a nonprofit as a paralegal, full-time, 9 to 6 in Washington, DC, making $28K a year, okay? I'm basically making the same in a PhD, except for I'm not stuck in a shitty office, 9 to 6, making nothing, you know? So I think like, and I'm getting a degree. So the financials thing, I think it really depends, because actually for a lot of lower income people, especially if you don't have care needs and stuff like that, or you come from a situation where you are making minimum wage, this is not like the worst case scenario. Next pro, okay, this is huge. You have access to university resources. Now, whatever you're thinking in your head, double that, triple that, quadruple that, and continue going on, because it is more than you think, okay? It's the gym, it's the library, it's borrowing equipment from the university, using their space, it's their cultural events, it's like a student discount, it's everything. I mean, like the fitness class I do, F45, every single morning, it costs around $300 per month out in the real world, and I'm basically doing it for free. And I have access to a ton of other, you know, fitness classes and the gym and so on. The library, I literally don't know how I'm ever gonna be giving this up, because in our library, like you can, even the books that they don't have, you can literally request it and they'll order it from another. I swear to God, even to this day, when I check out a book, and this can be novels, it doesn't have to be school books, I like hold it in my hands like, I can't believe I have access to all of the books in the world. I mean, this is a massive privilege. Like, I still can't get over it. Having access to university resources, especially if you're low income in general, like, oh, it's incredible, incredible. Also, even like, I've taken a mindfulness course here. You can take regular classes, like I plan to take some language courses next year. Has nothing to do with my PhD, just because I want to learn a language for free. Counseling, like, I have access to therapy. I mean, like, wow, these university resources just keep on, the list keeps on going. Okay, now the really big one, the big pro is that you get to learn, okay? You really do get to learn. If I, like right now, I'm going to be entering my 4th year of PhD. If I look at it, the knowledge I've received and how much I've learned in the last 3 years is probably like twice as much as I've learned in my entire life prior to this PhD. I mean, like, hands down, like, can't say nothing about it. I've learned so many things, okay? Especially in American politics, especially after I passed my comps and read those 100 and so books. Like, you cannot win an argument against me, bitch, okay? Like, I know my shit. I really know, and I've learned so much, and which this is another thing I think, like, I was so thankful, especially when I started taking courses, having access to syllabi, like the syllabi that professors like create with all of the lists. If I was, you know, just out in a regular student, I mean a regular citizen, and I wanted to learn about like race and incarceration or something, sure, I could find, you know, some things online and stuff, but I wouldn't really know like which books are the ones that we should be reading, which ones are like more biased, which ones have more scholarly evidence, which ones don't. The professors do all that for me when they give me my syllabus, so like it's a massively amazing thing. Like, you learn, you will know so much more, and then some. Okay, the last point I'm gonna say is that, as I've said before, all that education is repeated exposure to a certain type of language, to a certain type of readings, and a certain type of debate, and so on and so on and so on. You get this exposure. So for me, the way that I'm speaking now, the sentences that I'm able to put together, the connections I'm able to put together, the way I'm able to debate, to defend my argument, to understand things like critical thinking and all of that, that's solely because of the PhD. And especially the language, for me, as someone for whom like English was my third language, I don't come from a household or a neighborhood with much cultural and social capital that's valued in these spaces. In fact, I come with zero. So for most of my life, I've struggled, you know, to put my thoughts into words or to be really able to express myself. And even now, I think like I've received a lot of messages, people tell me that like, wow, you're basically, you know, like you're saying what I've been thinking or feeling but didn't have the words or the language to express it. That's how I used to feel back in college, you know, like when I would start reading like bell hooks and I'd be like, damn, like this is exactly what I'm thinking or feeling, but she's putting it into language that makes sense, and now I can share this with the rest of the world. Now I have that ability myself, and that comes solely from like repeated, constant exposure to a certain type of language, to a certain type of the readings, the class discussions and debates and so on. I think this skill in particular, like no matter what I do later in life, like is the most useful thing in the world, and I'm so thankful for. Okay, now moving on to cons. Con number one, your mental health. Most likely your mental health is going to be trash. You are going to be depressed and anxious. I mean like clinically depressed. I'm not just using the word, you know, whatever. Mental health, it's a pandemic, okay? So I actually want to do a separate video on this, so I'm not going to go too much into it. I want to do a video about how I almost died my first year of PhD because of mental health issues, and also because being working class, having gone through lots of struggle and lots of shit, I definitely had that impression of like, come on, you know, like, come on, I'm from, you know, X place, I've been through X shit, and this is just some, what, a PhD, like higher ed is gonna make me depressed and get on meds? Like, come on, this is like rich white people problems, you know, this isn't for working classes, this isn't for other like marginalized people. Forget that. Like, this is completely different, a completely different thing. Like, so yeah, keep this in mind. I mean, I'm gonna put some articles on the bottom so that you don't think that this is just my experience and I'm just being sensitive. I mean, it's like a pandemic. PhDs are like, over half of us are clinically depressed and anxious. You know, like the suicide rates are high. It's a pandemic. I mean, like they keep issuing research and scholarly articles, if you need those sources, that say like, we have problems, and it's because of the environment. Once again, I'm not gonna get too much into it. I can do a whole other video about it, but like, con number one, yeah, mental health, like it's gonna be trash. Number two, really quickly on, you're gonna realize that academia is not the great equalizer that you thought it was. If you have any thoughts or ideas in your head and you were imagining academia as this like space of radical politics and like this like amazing, you know, like place for that's anti-capitalist and so on and so on and so, forget it. Get it out of your head, okay? The disconnect, the gap between theory and practice is huge. So while yes, of course, I can walk into any one of my American politics classrooms and, you know, start my argument with down with white supremacist capitalist patriarchy, and everyone's gonna be like, yeah, duh, why are you even saying this, Lulu? Like, we already know it. That doesn't bleed into practice, okay? Universities are just corporations, like any other, their interest is to exploit you for profit, to profit from you as much as you can, which is what they do with PhD students, because we are extremely low cost labor for them and we do the work of professors and basically get paid nothing. So I think that's something that, like, if you have those illusions in your head, get them out of your head. And it's also something that you learn real quick, that this is, and I think like the difference here is that, like, if I work for a bank, if I work for like a big corporation, I expect and I understand, like, yeah, they're gonna treat me like shit. I'm just labor, you know, like, this is capitalism that we live in. But for some reason, and maybe it's just me because I was naive, but for some reason I think like, oh, but universities are different. They're these spaces where we celebrate diversity and, you know, like all of this stuff, and they're extremely, you know, anti-capitalist and all of these things. No, they are really not. Okay, now this next con, I don't really know how to name it. I titled it under insecurity, but I felt since day one, since starting this PhD, I felt like everybody else around me was given an instruction manual on how to do it, and I didn't receive one. And genuinely, I felt that way for like a full 2 years. I was like, everyone seems to know what they're doing and I just have no idea. So this is just one example of how this environment, the PhD, breeds insecurity in every, or like imposter syndrome or whatever, in every single way imaginable. Basically, you're always expected to do things, you know, to create, to write, to present, to, you know, do your go further in your progress and so on, but you are never told how to. So this to me was always like, you know, even with like when I was taking my comprehensive exams, I'm supposed to like make my reading list and so on. So it's just like, they tell you to do this, but no one tells you how to do anything. So here's that issue of like the instruction manual that, you know, you feel like it wasn't given to you. Once again, a lot of people even in my cohort and in many other PhDs are the sons and daughters of professors. It's extremely common, way more common than I ever imagined in my life. A lot of people come from, you know, backgrounds where everyone around them had a PhD or went to higher ed. I am a first generation high school graduate, so of course, you know, it's also like personal and context matters. Not everyone's gonna feel that way. Just the lack of instruction and guidance that I've received, at least in my program, which has literally been zero. Like, no instruction, no guidance. You're just expected to know how to do things, but no one tells you how. And that's another thing, like, professors don't really teach, okay? I am not a fan of of classes at all, because they're literally like elite book clubs where we just all go in, we've done the reading, and the professor is kind of just sitting there. Depends from professor to professor, of course, like huge difference in variety, but for the most part, they aren't very useful, and just the lack of teaching. So another, just like real quick, another myth that I had in my mind before starting a PhD, I kind of thought that like, okay, so I've done the bachelor's, you know, like this is gonna be like kind of like an extension of my education, you know, like I know what school is about. I've gone to like 4 schools by this point already. This is not it, okay? The jump between like consuming knowledge from your professor to having to create knowledge, because that's what you do in PhD, is huge. I mean, it's a massive difference. I definitely walked into the PhD thinking that I'm going to be still consuming knowledge, like learning and so on, and then, you know, like potentially later with my dissertation I'll be creating something. That's not the case. Like, you're supposed to sort of create from day one, and I have a lot of issues with that. But yeah, and additionally to all this insecurity and things like that, like, oh my god, I really don't know, like, you're never really gonna understand this until you're in it, but like the feedback you receive from your professors is brutal. I mean, literally brutal. You're constantly made to feel like you're trash, your work is trash, you're useless, worthless, like what you're doing is not good enough. And all of this also causes for an extremely toxic environment. And I know that I feel that way in my department, but it's not just me. I've read this about, you know, about a lot of people in other institutions. There is something about this, like, all of this that breeds a lot of insecurity, that breeds a lot of imposter syndrome, that just creates an incredibly toxic environment where you can't really support each other because you're constantly insecure about yourself, and insecurity, you know, gets all the worst out of us. The next con I've listed under the title of productivity. Okay, so of course, you know, I talked about this in my previous videos. Productivity is a disease of capitalism. Like, in any job, you're constantly expected to produce. But let me talk about it in context of the PhD. Okay, so we are actually doing creative work. Okay, so writing a paper is creative work. It's not something that you can force. I cannot create knowledge by a deadline. You know, that's not how it works. Yet that is exactly what is expected of you. That is something that ties into the mental health issues because, you know, like, even thinking back to my job as a paralegal in DC, I can wake up and be totally not in the mood and, you know, don't want to do shit, but if I have to fill out Excel spreadsheets all day, or if I had to fill out the immigration forms that I used to work with, like, I won't be happy about it, but I'm able to push the numbers and whatever is necessary at the end of the day. If I have to write a paper, like, I don't know, last paper I wrote was about the power of the erotic and like feminist thought and stuff like that. I cannot push it out by a deadline. That's just not how it works. And you're expected to, and you're gonna be yelled at if you don't do it, and you're gonna be seen as lazy and, you know, spoiled if you don't do it, even though at the same time, the entire theory that what we study and the content of everything is like, yeah, of course, you know, anti-capitalist, anti-productivity, like, we are not machines and so on, but you're expected to be a machine. That's just how it works. This is a really minor, quick con. Basically, as with most things and most jobs where, you know, this is supposed to be your passion, once you make your passion your work, you lose your passion for it. So be careful. Basically, if you really think that you're, you know, extremely interested in, I don't know, like, philosophy or theory of reproductive rights or something, or you're, you know, into, you know, whatever social injustice issue and so on, and then you make that be your job, yeah, some of that passion, it fades because now you're doing it for profit and so on. So it's just something to keep in mind. Basically, maybe ask yourself, is this just something I'm interested in right now as like a hobby and something I want to learn more about, or is this something that I'm willing to literally, like, you know, spend my life researching and writing about and doing it as a job, because it's gonna be a job. PhD is a job. It's not a passion project. It's not something where, you know, I'm sustaining myself with my passion. Like, it's a job, like any other job. Okay, next con. So remember how I told you all in pros that you get to work from home and you get to set your own schedule and so on? So with that also comes the fact that you will never, ever have a day off. Never, ever, ever. Whether it takes you 5, 7, or 10, or 12 years to finish your PhD, in that time period, you will not have a single day off. Since I started my PhD 3 years ago, that's when I started it, and still today, I have not had a day off, because your work never ever stops. Like, living with Isaiah every single Friday when he comes home from work, you know, at like 7 p.m. or something, and just kind of like exhales, you know, it's the weekend, we can go do things and stuff like that. I feel so jealous of the feeling, of just that feeling that you can come home. And of course, you know, yeah, in any job you have emails waiting for you on Monday, and you know, it's a little difficult to check out for the weekend and so on, but you're able to, you have the ability, you know, you can do it and so on. I look at that like, oh my God, that must feel amazing, because for me, it's just, there's no stopping, you know, there's always work to be done. And also because, as I talked about before with the productivity and creativity and so on, because it's not something that you can force yourself to do, it's almost like I constantly have to be monitoring myself, like, oh my God, am I feeling like I could write something right now? Even if it's Saturday at 9 p.m., then I should be doing it, because who is to say that Monday at 9 a.m. I'm gonna have that same feeling and ability to write? So it's like, you're never off clock, ever, ever, ever. I mean, I've worked through Christmas, I've worked through New Year's. All the professors, ask any professor, and they're gonna say that, like, they love Thanksgiving break and they love winter break and summer break, because that's the time to get the most work done. It's pathetic, like horrible. Okay, next con. You will likely have no social or personal life for quite a while. Of course, this depends on person to person, you know, how much you're able to put on your plate and so on. But at least in my case, especially for the first 2 years, legitimately did not have time to do anything, to meet anyone. I mean, to the point where I would have a friend in DC ask, hey, can we have, you know, like one Friday night out together or something? And my answer would be like, yes, when the semester is over. Legitimately, I mean, like, reading 12 hours a day, 7 days a week, you know, carrying 3-4 courses a semester and so on, you simply do not have the time. And additionally, if you do choose to prioritize your social life and personal life, which of course I still did to some extent, you're looked down upon for doing that, because remember, you have to be suffering in a PhD for it to be legitimate. Basically, this is supposed to be your life calling, your passion. That's something that I run into a lot with a lot of people in my department and other people. It's like, this is their whole life. Like, this PhD is everything for them. This is not my whole life. No job is ever going to be my whole life. Like, it is important, incredibly important for me to have meaningful, loving relationships with family, with people outside of the PhD, to pursue hobbies, to do things that, you know, matter to me, and so on. Those are things that you basically are expected not to have. Like, what reason do you have to not be working right now, you know? So just be, especially, I mean, ask anyone who's in grad school, okay? We are extremely busy, extremely busy, especially in the beginning. So just be ready to say bye to your social life for the time being. Okay, now perhaps the biggest con ever. You will have no money whatsoever for several decades. I mean, like, we make like $25K a year or something. Rent is upwards to $1,000, and I think the average, I looked it up once in the country, it was either 20 or 18K a year. It takes, in my department, it takes on average 7 years to finish a PhD. Once again, I looked up the national average once, and I think it was actually 9 years or something of the sort. That is a lot of time. And also keep in mind that this is like your mid to late 20s. So by the time I'm gonna graduate, I'm gonna be like 30. Basically the decade when you are supposed to make some money to buy your own car, unless you were rich and your parents bought it for you when you were 16. But you're supposed to make the money to buy your own car, to possibly maybe buy your own apartment or your own house, to get married, okay? Like, I can't afford to get married. Like, I'm not making no money. Everything that comes in immediately goes out. To have children, like, this is I'm so angry about this, I could explode. So maybe I'll do another video about this, but like, it's insane. So this is another example of where like academia is basically made for people who are wealthy already, because you cannot care for other people. If you have aging parents, if you have children, if you want to do anything with your life, like future investments and so on, you will simply not have the money. And why I said also for several decades, because like, once you finish this, and I'm not going to be talking about the job market, but the job market is trash, and basically like, you're going to be like an adjunct for a while or doing postdocs and things like that, during which time you'll basically be making the same 20K or whatever, which is why we have professors sleeping in their cars. I mean, it's like a serious problem, and it's getting worse and worse. So, you know, even if you're one of the lucky ones and get on tenure track, by the time that you actually making tenure money, you're like 40. Bitch, I'm 40, like, what am I supposed to do now? Now I can buy a car, now I can have kids, like, half my life is over by that point, you know? So it's like the financial cost is massive, and it's for a long period. Like, I think keep those two things in mind, because it's not just, you know, like, I can struggle during, you know, college, 4 years. Okay, 4 years, I'm gonna be poor, I'm like 18, 19, 20, 21, who cares? I don't need money. This is a decade or more than that. And it's also the time period when you will want to do things like a freaking wedding. Like, I would love to, you know? And just to add to this a little bit, as I said, the job market is trash, and it's, you know, terrible, and everybody tells you if your plan is to make money, don't do a PhD, don't get into a PhD. I don't know much about other industries, but like, I think the difference is that, you know, if you spend that much time and suffer that much, you know, like you suffer through law school, you suffer through medical school, there is some type of reward in the end, which mostly is like high income. There is none of that reward here in a PhD in humanities, with how our economy is looking right now, how the academic job market is looking right now, and so on. So keep that in mind. Okay, I have to try to speak more quietly because I was on a conference call. Pandemic life, right? Anyways, the last point, which isn't like the biggest deal ever, but you will be completely misunderstood by all of your friends and family. Like, no one's gonna understand what you're going through unless they happen to also be doing a PhD or have done a PhD and so on. this is, you know, I have been thinking there needs to be a fucking Netflix show about like the life of a PhD, because there currently is no representation whatsoever of what it's like, which is why I had so many confusions and wrong ideas of what it's going to be like, and which is why it's so hard for me to convey to another person what it is like. And especially, I mean, like when it comes to mental health issues, like when I had severe panic attacks and like near-death experiences my first year, I remember telling my friends and they'd be like, oh, you know, yeah, it's stressful, I guess, to read a lot, because I thought the same before doing the PhD. I thought the same. I was like, what are all these privileged kids complaining about? Like, you know, and that's because you genuinely cannot understand what this institution does to you and how it damages you unless you're in it, unless you're going through the program. And that's just something that, like, for me, I like to be understood. I need genuine support from people near me. So that's something where, like, my family doesn't understand, you know, have no idea. My dad keeps asking me, when am I going to finish volunteering? Because all he knows is that, like, I'm making no money, so I must be volunteering. You know, and it's just something that you basically have to live with. So in conclusion, should you get a PhD? Should you not get a PhD? I think that question is actually completely unrelated to the pros and cons that I just mentioned, because it's so context situation based. For me personally, if I look at my mental health state right now, if I look at the fact that basically I've lost all joy in life since starting this PhD, I remember Lulu and how she was 3 years ago, you know, the way I approached life and how easily happy and joyful I was, and I look at her and I'm like, I can never get that girl back, and that's grief. It's really sad. I will never forgive what this institution has done to me. So, you know, to me the answer would be like, nah, I shouldn't have gotten a PhD. At the same time, why did I get a PhD? I couldn't afford a master's because I'm poor, and a PhD is for free. So in fact they pay, you know, so I didn't really have a choice. And also I needed to get back into the US. The only way I could do that was with a student visa. So it's like, you can't say a yes or no. It's so, and then what jobs could I have had with a bachelor's degree? You know, some of those issues are more systemic and far-reaching than just a PhD. It's not like you know, it's capitalism. It's not like I had better opportunities before that. I would have been basically suffering either way. So I think that is a completely different question. I hope that you can take something away from these pros and cons. Remember, don't kill me. This is my personal experience. If you have any issues or further questions, just drop them below, and I'm so happy to engage in this conversation. And, like, you know, I want my experience to be an open book to anybody who's even thinking about entering academia. I'm also going to insert a couple of articles below. Definitely gonna insert Kiona's articles on the abuses that go on in higher ed. I'm gonna insert stats on our mental health problems, and also the article, I love it, which is called Getting a PhD or Going to Grad School Should Be Challenging, Not Traumatic. And this is literally sums up my whole experience. Anyways, love you all so much. Have a wonderful day, and let's keep chatting about academia.